It was 0600 hours at the Naval Training Command in Virginia. The air smelled of disinfectant and burnt coffee, the mess hall echoing with the heavy rhythm of trays, clattering and recruits shouting over each other. 12 new trainees had just finished their first week, a week full of yelling, drills, and aching muscles, and they walked into the mess hall that morning with the kind of loud energy only rookies could have. Jenkins, a tall, broad-shouldered young man from Texas, led the pack, strutting in like he owned the place. Finally, he groaned, real food. I swear that last meal was cardboard disguised as meat. The group burst into laughter. They were proud, cocky, and still believed training was a game of who could look tougher. The mess hall was bright. Rows of steel tables lined up perfectly, the walls covered with banners reading honor, courage, commitment. But their laughter drowned out everything else. Then someone noticed her. At the far end of the hall, sitting alone by a window, was a woman, early 30s maybe, dressed in a simple Navy utility uniform. No rank patch, no name tag. Her posture was straight, but her body language calm, almost detached. She was quietly eating scrambled eggs, slow and deliberate, her eyes fixed not on her food, but on the recruits themselves. She didn't look intimidating. She didn't even look interested. She was just there. "Who's that?" whispered Carter, the youngest recruit. "Probably admin," Jenkins said, smirking. "Or someone who files reports all day. You can tell. No muscle tone." The others laughed. None of them noticed how their commanding officer, sitting at the far corner, briefly glanced toward the woman and gave the faintest smirk, as if he knew something they didn't. They didn't know it yet. But the quiet woman wasn't there by accident. The woman, Lieutenant Commander Elena Graves, had been ordered by the base commander to observe the new class, to evaluate their discipline, their awareness, and most importantly, their respect. What they didn't know was that Graves was no ordinary officer. She had served 15 years in the Navy, 8 of those in the SEALs, a rare achievement for any soldier, let alone a woman. Her name was whispered among operatives who had seen combat missions in Somalia, Yemen, and Afghanistan. She'd seen more chaos than most of these recruits could imagine. But this morning, she wasn't Lieutenant Commander Graves. She was just Elena, the quiet nobody at the corner table. Her uniform had no markings for a reason. This was a test of character, and she wanted to see who they really were when they thought nobody important was watching. The recruits' laughter grew louder. Jenkins was telling a story about a failed obstacle run, using exaggerated movements to make his buddies laugh. But in his performance, he slammed his tray down a little too hard on the table next to hers, splattering orange juice onto her uniform. "Oops," he said, smirking. "Didn't see you there." Graves slowly looked up. Her eyes, cold gray, piercing, met his for a brief second. She didn't say a word. Then she looked back down and continued eating. Her calm unnerved him more than an insult would have. "You could at least apologize," Carter whispered, elbowing Jenkins. "Relax, she's not an officer," Jenkins said, though his voice had lost some of its confidence. "Probably just logistics staff or something. You know how they are. All rules, no action." The woman didn't react, didn't even flinch. Her silence seemed deliberate, controlled. Another recruit, Alvarez, decided to push further. "Hey, ma'am," he called across the table. "You one of the cooks or something? Because if you are, can you tell them to go easy on the salt? I feel like I'm eating the ocean." The table erupted with laughter. Graves set her fork down, straightened her back, and took a slow sip of coffee. The air shifted slightly, a kind of stillness that creeps in before something breaks. The nearby recruits, the ones not part of Jenkins' group, began to quiet down, sensing something they couldn't explain. Jenkins laughed louder, mistaking her silence for submission. Guess she can't take a joke, he said. Hey, we're just trying to. And she spoke. You think noise makes you strong? Her voice was soft, almost calm, but every syllable carried weight. The laughter died instantly. Jenkins froze. Ah, what? Graves looked up, her expression unreadable. In my line of work, she said, noise gets you killed. No one spoke. Even the sound of trays clattering in the background seemed to fade. Carter swallowed hard. There was something about her tone, something that didn't sound like the office or kitchen staff. It sounded like someone who'd seen the edge and walked back alive. But Jenkins couldn't stand the silence. He gave a nervous chuckle. Your line of work, huh? What's that? Writing reports. The woman stared at him for a long second. Not angry, not offended. Just looking. And for that second, Jenkins felt completely exposed, as if she could see every insecurity behind his forced confidence. Then, without another word, she stood up, collected her tray, and walked past him. The recruit stepped aside instinctively. Even without insignia, her presence was commanding. After she left, the table stayed quiet. What the hell was that? Jenkins muttered. Dude, Alvarez said, still staring at the door. You saw her eyes? That wasn't normal. That woman's seen something. Carter nodded slowly. She looked like she could break your neck without spilling her coffee. They tried to laugh, but it didn't sound genuine. The tension lingered like smoke in the air. Meanwhile, the commanding officer at the far end of the hall stood up, gathering his papers. As he passed their table, he paused. Enjoying breakfast, recruits? He asked casually. Yes, sir. They barked. He smiled faintly. Good. You'll be meeting your new evaluator this afternoon. Be on your best behavior. And then, almost too quietly, he added, You've already met her. The recruits blinked. Sir? But the officer didn't answer. He just walked away, leaving them more confused than before. Outside, Lieutenant Commander Elena Graves stood by the drill field, her hands behind her back, watching the sunrise. The faint sound of laughter from the mess hall still echoed faintly in the distance. She wasn't angry. She'd seen worse: arrogance, ignorance, disrespect. It all meant the same thing: inexperience. But she also knew what came next. By the end of the day, those same 12 recruits would see her again, not as the quiet woman they mocked, but as their commanding SEAL instructor. And by the time she was finished with them, they would never forget her name. She smiled faintly. Let's see how they handle the truth, she murmured to herself, turning away from the sunrise toward the training grounds. Tomorrow, they'd learn what silence truly meant. The morning haze had barely lifted when the 12 recruits gathered on the field, waiting for the day's schedule. Their laughter from breakfast still echoed faintly among them, but now it carried a nervous edge. Something about the woman in the mess hall, her tone, her stare, the way the commander hinted they'd meet her again, lingered in their minds. Jenkins tried to shake it off. Man, that lady was just some admin playing tough, he said, trying to sound confident. But his voice betrayed a flicker of doubt. Then why'd the commander say we'd already met her? Carter asked quietly. Jenkins shrugged. Probably meant someone else. Maybe he was just joking. But none of them were laughing. The recruits stood in formation, sweat glistening on their faces as the Virginia sun began to climb. The base's loudspeakers crackled, announcing, "All new recruits report to Training Bay 3 for a surprise evaluation." They exchanged curious looks. Surprise evaluation? That wasn't on the schedule. As they jogged toward the bay, Alvarez muttered, "Bet it's another endurance test. These guys love making us puke before lunch." The others chuckled weakly. None of them expected what awaited them inside. The moment they entered, the air changed. The massive steel doors shut behind them with a metallic clang, echoing through the chamber. The floor smelled of oil and salt water, typical of training areas used for SEAL exercises. Instructors stood along the walls, their faces unreadable. Then the commanding officer stepped forward. "Recruits," he barked, "you're about to meet someone who's going to evaluate whether you belong here or not." A murmur rippled through the line. He turned toward the shadows near the far wall. "Lieutenant Commander, they're all yours." Out of the dim light, Boots echoed, steady, precise, and calm. The recruits' hearts sank as they saw her. The woman from the mess hall. Only this time, she wasn't wearing a plain uniform. Now, she stood in full tactical SEAL gear, dark fatigues, combat boots, and a subdued patch bearing the trident insignia. The same symbol every SEAL carried as their badge of honor. Her hair was tied back, her expression unreadable. Jenkins's mouth went dry. "Good morning, recruits," she said evenly. "My name is Lieutenant Commander Elena Graves. For the next few weeks, I'll be your evaluator. You'll address me as ma'am or commander. Understood?" The recruit stammered a weak, "Yes, ma'am." Her gaze swept across them, sharp and calm, pausing briefly on Jenkins. Her eyes said nothing, but that silence felt like a punishment on its own. "Some of you," she continued, "believe toughness comes from how loud you can be, how fast you can talk, or how much you can show off. Let's see how well that holds when you can't breathe." She pointed toward the obstacle course outside. "Follow me." The recruits obeyed immediately. No one dared make a sound. The once cocky group that strutted into the mess hall now moved like nervous schoolchildren. Their laughter was gone, replaced by quick breaths and darting eyes. The course was brutal: steel ropes, water pits, high walls, and sand dunes that looked endless under the sun. Graves stood at the starting line, arms crossed. "This," she said, "isn't about strength. It's about control. Lose that, and you lose everything." She blew the whistle. They ran. The first sprint across the sand hit them like a hammer. Within minutes, they were gasping. Jenkins tried to keep pace, pride still burning in his chest, but Graves's voice cut through the air. "Pace yourself, recruit. Your ego doesn't need oxygen, you do." The others glanced at her, realizing she wasn't even out of breath as she jogged beside them, boots digging into the sand as effortlessly as if she were on pavement. When they reached the rope climb, Carter slipped halfway up and fell, landing hard. Jenkins moved to laugh, instinct, the same arrogance that had fueled him all week, but Graves caught the look before it could form. "Go help him," she said sharply. Jenkins hesitated. "I said help him, not stare." He obeyed. Together, they climbed again, this time slower, more focused. Carter's breathing steadied as Jenkins pushed from below. When they reached the top, Graves nodded once. "Better. You don't pass in this world by yourself." The recruits realized she wasn't just drilling their muscles, she was drilling their pride. Every instruction, every silent glance, was a mirror held up to their behavior. By the third obstacle, the freezing pool crawl, exhaustion set in. They were chest-deep in icy water, dragging their rifles above the surface. One recruit, Harris, stopped moving. "I can't," he gasped. "It's too cold." Graves walked up to the edge of the pool and crouched. "You think the enemy waits for warm water?" she asked quietly. He didn't respond. His teeth chattered violently. She leaned closer. "You're not cold. You're scared. Big difference." Her words weren't cruel. They were real. Harris stared at her, and something in his eyes shifted. He clenched his jaw and pushed forward, crawling through the last few feet of mud until he collapsed on the other side. Graves stood up, her voice calm. "That's how you win. not by being fearless, but by moving through fear. 2 hours later, when the exercise ended, the recruits stood trembling and soaked, their clothes heavy with mud. The sun was high now, burning through the haze, but none of them felt its warmth. They stood silently in a line, too tired to talk, too humbled to joke. Graves walked in front of them, her steps deliberate, her eyes steady. "You met me this morning," she said. "You didn't recognize me. You saw a woman, not a warrior. You saw quiet, not command." Her voice hardened. "That's your first lesson. Respect doesn't look like you expect. The strongest people in this uniform aren't the ones who shout. They're the ones who act when no one's watching." No one moved. Jenkins swallowed hard, eyes down. He wanted to say something, to apologize, but her presence made words feel useless. Graves stopped in front of him. "Recruit Jenkins," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "Tell me, what did you learn today?" He hesitated, his throat tight. "Not to judge what I don't understand, ma'am." A small flicker of approval passed over her face, gone as quickly as it came. "Good," she said. "Then maybe there's hope for you yet?" As the recruits marched back to barracks, none spoke. The sound of boots crunching on gravel was the only thing filling the air. Carter finally broke the silence. "She's a SEAL," he whispered. "An actual SEAL, and we made fun of her." "Yeah," Alvarez muttered. "We're dead." Jenkins didn't answer. He just stared ahead, jaw clenched. The words "noise gets you killed" replayed in his head like a ghost he couldn't shake. Inside the command office, Graves removed her tactical gloves and exhaled slowly. The commander was waiting. "They learning?" he asked, pouring coffee into a steel mug. Graves nodded. "They're young, arrogant, but they'll get there." He smirked. "You sure you don't want to go easy on them?" She gave a faint smile. "They'll thank me later. The field doesn't go easy on anyone, especially not fools." She glanced out the window, watching the recruits drag themselves back across the yard, soaked, silent, changed. "Tomorrow," she murmured, "we break them down. Then we'll see what they're really made of." The next morning, the mess hall was quieter than usual. The same 12 recruits, who had once filled it with laughter, now sat scattered, nursing bruises and sore muscles from the previous day's evaluation. Their trays were barely touched. Even Jenkins, normally the loudest voice in the room, stared blankly at his oatmeal, replaying every word Lieutenant Commander Graves had said. The memory of her voice, calm, steady, and terrifyingly certain, hung over all of them. Respect doesn't look like you expect. No one dared joke now. Carter leaned in, whispering, "You think she's going to do it again today?" "Do what?" Alvarez asked. "Break us," Carter said simply. Jenkins looked up from his tray. His eyes were heavy with fatigue. "She doesn't have to," he muttered. "She already did." The others fell silent. Across the room, an instructor entered, clipboard in hand. "Training field. 10 minutes," he barked before leaving as quickly as he came. They all knew what that meant. Outside, the morning air was thick with humidity. The field was still muddy from yesterday's drills, but this time, no one complained. The 12 recruits stood in formation, sweat already glistening under their collars. Graves appeared from the far end of the field, wearing a simple training uniform, no gear, no insignia, just that same quiet authority that seemed to silence the world around her. "Morning, recruits," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried like thunder through the still air. "I hope you slept well." No one answered. "I didn't," she added. "I was up reviewing your performance. And I realized something. Most of you still don't understand what it means to wear that uniform." She walked slowly in front of them, eyes scanning each face. "You think being a sailor or a SEAL is about toughness. about showing off, about how loud you can sound when the instructor's watching. She stopped, her gaze fixed on Jenkins. But when it matters, when it's dark, when it's cold, when people are counting on you, none of that noise will matter. Only discipline will. Her words hit like punches. She pointed toward the pull-up bars. 50 reps. Team effort. You fail as one, you start over. They moved, forming 2 groups of 6. At first, they worked individually, each trying to outdo the other. Jenkins grunted loudly, showing off his strength. Carter tried to match him. But soon, their rhythm broke, some recruits falling behind. Graves blew the whistle. Stop. They froze mid-motion, panting heavily. You're competing, she said, not cooperating. You think you're showing strength, but you're showing weakness, ego. Jenkins glared at the ground. His arms burned, his pride burning hotter. Graves stepped closer. Let me tell you something about ego, recruit. Out there, ego doesn't just get you hurt. It gets people killed. And I've seen it happen. Her voice dropped, heavy with something none of them had heard before, memory. When I was deployed in Somalia, she continued, one of my men broke formation to prove he could clear a room faster. He was good, fast, confident, but he didn't wait for the signal. He went in alone. She paused, eyes distant for a brief moment. He never came out. The recruit stood still, the air thick with silence. That's what ego costs, she said quietly. A heartbeat, a friend, a flag on a folded piece of cloth. Her gaze swept across them again. Now start over. Together. This time, no one rushed. Jenkins adjusted his grip, counting out loud to keep the rhythm steady. Carter encouraged the slower ones. Alvarez held the bar steady for his partner. Slowly, painfully, they began to move as one. When they finished, Graves nodded once. Better, but she wasn't done. Pair up, she ordered. One partner blindfolded, one guiding. Cross the obstacle field together. There were groans, but they obeyed. Jenkins paired with Carter, Alvarez with Harris. Graves handed out blindfolds, her tone crisp. This exercise isn't about muscle, it's about trust. The recruits began. The blindfolded stumbled, fell into mud, hit barriers, and got tangled in ropes. Some cursed under their breath. Others panicked. Jenkins guided Carter clumsily at first. Left, left, no, your other left. Carter laughed nervously. You're terrible at this. But after several missteps, Jenkins's tone softened. Okay, my voice. Just follow my voice. He kept his words steady this time. Step up. One more. Good. Something clicked between them. Coordination, patience, respect. By the end, when Carter stumbled out of the last pit, he wasn't laughing. He turned to Jenkins. Didn't think you had it in you. Jenkins smirked. Didn't think I did either. Graves watched silently, her expression unreadable, but her eyes gleaming faintly with approval. Hours later, they gathered by the bleachers, filthy but focused. Graves stood before them, arms crossed. You've started to understand something most recruits never do, she said. Respect isn't given by rank. It's earned by action. She looked at each of them in turn. Yesterday, you saw me as someone beneath you. Today, you followed me through the mud. You trusted my voice. That's progress. But it's not enough. She paused, letting the words hang. You want to wear this uniform? And learn this. Respect isn't about who salutes first. It's about who carries the weight when everyone else collapses. Her tone softened, almost human. When you respect the people beside you, no matter who they are, you stop being recruits. You start becoming a team. She turned to leave and stopped. Tomorrow morning, 0400, full gear. You'll need everything you've got. As she walked away, The recruits stood in silence. None of them dared move until she was gone. That night, the barracks were unusually quiet. No laughter, no card games, no trash talk. Jenkins lay in his bunk, staring at the ceiling. Carter rolled over in the bunk across from him. "You awake?" "Yeah." "Think she meant what she said?" "About the team thing?" Jenkins nodded slowly. "Yeah, I do," he sighed, rubbing his aching hands. "You know what's crazy? I thought she was just trying to humiliate us. But she's not. She's trying to make us better." Carter smirked faintly in the dark. "Didn't think I'd ever hear you say that." "Yeah, well," Jenkins muttered. "Guess I'm learning respect the hard way." The next morning would change them again, physically and mentally. But that night, lying in their bunks, sore, tired, and quiet, something new settled among the 12 of them. It wasn't fear anymore. It was respect, earned, not demanded. And though none of them said it out loud, they all knew the same thing. Lieutenant Commander Elena Graves wasn't just training them to survive the Navy. She was training them to survive life. The alarm went off at 040, not the usual soft buzzer, but a blaring klaxon that made every recruit leap from their bunks, like they'd been hit with electricity. The lights flickered on, flooding the barracks in a harsh white glow. "Field drill. Move out," came the shout from outside. Jenkins, Carter, Alvarez, and the others scrambled into their gear. Boots, vests, helmets. No one spoke. The air was thick with tension. The last time something like this happened, Graves had turned a training run into a 12-mile crawl through mud and rain. They ran out to the courtyard, breath fogging in the cold morning air. The moon was still hanging low, the sun not yet touching the horizon. Lieutenant Commander Graves stood in the center, hands behind her back, expression unreadable. Around her were 4 other instructors, all silent, all waiting. "Good morning," Graves said, her voice cool and calm. "You have 5 minutes to report to the training range. Full pack, full ammo weight, simulated weapons. Move." They sprinted. Boots pounded the dirt. Packs clanked with gear. Carter's lungs burned, but he didn't dare slow down. Jenkins was beside him, jaw set, eyes forward. When they reached the range, the recruits froze. The obstacle course they'd known was transformed overnight. Barbed wire, trenches filled with ice water, walls slick with oil, smoke rising from burning barrels. It looked more like a war zone than a training field. Graves followed them in, her boots crunching against the gravel. "Today," she said, "you'll experience what chaos feels like. Your mission is simple. Reach the extraction point. Every one of you. Leave no one behind. Fail that, and you fail as a unit." She glanced at her watch. "You have 2 hours. Begin." The whistle blew, and the chaos began. Mud splattered as they crawled under wire. Smoke grenades hissed, filling the air with thick gray clouds. The sound of simulated gunfire echoed through the field. Instructors shouted from hidden corners. "Move, recruits!" "You call that a CRAWL?" Jenkins was in the front, grunting as he pulled himself under the wire. Carter followed, nearly choking on the smoke. Alvarez helped another recruit, Morales, who had slipped face first into the mud. "Get up," Alvarez yelled. "I'm fine." Morales coughed, pushing himself forward. Graves watched from a distance, her eyes sharp. She wasn't shouting. She didn't need to. Her silence was more commanding than any scream. Halfway through the field, the recruits reached a high wall slick with oil. It looked impossible. Jenkins tried first. He jumped, hands slipping on the greasy surface, landing hard on his back. Again. Graves called out. He went again, slipped, fell. Carter joined him. Together, they tried building momentum, using each other's shoulders for leverage. Alvarez pushed from below. Morales grabbed the top edge and pulled himself over, panting. Then he reached down. "Come on," Morales yelled. "Teamwork, remember?" Jenkins looked up, grit in his teeth, and took the hand. They hauled him over. Then Carter. Then the rest. When the last one, a smaller recruit named Diaz, struggled to reach the top, Jenkins and Morales pulled him over together. They collapsed on the other side, gasping. Graves watched from a nearby tower. For a split second, a faint smile flickered across her face. But the drill was far from over. Ahead was the swamp field, waist-deep, freezing, filled with reeds and hidden pits. The recruits hesitated. Graves' voice came through the loudspeaker. "You stop moving, you fail. You complain, you fail. You think this is cold? Try the Baltic Sea in January." Without a word, Jenkins waded in first. The shock of the icy water made him gasp, but he pushed forward. One by one, the others followed. Carter slipped. Alvarez grabbed his vest before he went under. By the time they made it through, their hands were shaking, teeth chattering. But no one quit. That was new. When they reached the final stretch, a simulated rescue under fire, smoke erupted again. Loudspeakers blasted the sounds of helicopters and explosions. They were told one of their own was injured. Diaz, chosen by Graves, lay still in the dirt. Graves' voice boomed over the field. "He's down. You have 10 minutes to extract him." Jenkins dropped to his knees. "We can carry him. No time for slow moves." Carter shouted. Graves' voice cut in again, cold and cutting. "Decide fast. Lives depend on it." For a heartbeat, they all froze. Too many voices, too many plans. Then Alvarez stepped up. "We build a sling. Use our belts and jackets." They moved fast, tying belts together, wrapping Diaz tight. Jenkins and Carter lifted him, Morales clearing the path. When they stumbled across the finish line, Graves was waiting, stopwatch in hand. 9 minutes, 38 seconds, she said. "You made it." No one cheered. They just stood there, drenched, shivering, exhausted. Graves looked over them. "Half of you thought this was impossible. And yet, you did it, because you finally stopped thinking about yourself." She paced slowly. "That's what separates soldiers from warriors. Warriors move as one." But as they caught their breath, one of the instructors stepped forward, a burly man named Chief Dalton. He gave Graves a look. "Permission to test them further, ma'am?" Graves raised an eyebrow. "Explain." Dalton smirked. "They think they've learned teamwork. Let's see how they do under pressure." He pointed toward the recruits. "You've got a mole among you. Someone sabotaged your gear earlier. You've got 5 minutes to find out who." The recruits exchanged looks, confusion spreading fast. "What?" Jenkins asked. Graves stayed silent. Her expression didn't give anything away. Dalton folded his arms. 5 minutes, go." The recruits began arguing immediately. Carter accused Jenkins of messing with the packs. Alvarez defended him. Morales suspected Harris. Voices rose, fingers pointed. Graves watched quietly. Then, at the 4-minute mark, she finally spoke. "Stop." A word cut through the air like a blade. "Look at you," she said softly. "The moment pressure hits, you turn on each other. You think teamwork ends when someone whispers a lie." She stepped forward, eyes fierce. There was no mole. No sabotage. Just a test, one you failed. Shame washed over the recruits. Heads lowered. Graves sighed, the sound heavy with disappointment and something deeper, experience. Out there, the enemy won't always shoot first. Sometimes they'll just make you doubt each other. And that's when units fall apart. Her voice softened again. Trust isn't built in comfort. It's built in storms like this. She turned to leave. Clean up. You'll need your strength for tomorrow. As the recruits trudged back, covered in mud and failure, they didn't speak. Not until they reached the barracks. Jenkins finally broke the silence. She's right. Carter looked up. About what? All of it, Jenkins said. We thought we had it figured out. But the moment things got hard, we cracked. Alvarez leaned against his bunk. She's not breaking us. She's rebuilding us. They all went quiet again, letting the truth of that sink in. That night, as Graves sat alone in her office, reviewing the day's footage, she paused on one frame, Jenkins pulling Diaz over the wall. A small smile touched her lips. They'll make it, she whispered to herself. If they keep fighting like that, they'll make it. Outside, the wind howled against the barracks. But inside, the 12 recruits slept deeply. United by exhaustion and a faint, growing fire, one that Lieutenant Commander Graves had lit herself. Tomorrow, she would push them even harder. Because she knew something they didn't yet understand. Great soldiers aren't born on calm days. They're forged in storms. The morning sun broke across the horizon like molten steel, lighting the base in a glow of gold and fire. The recruits were already awake before the alarm sounded. After the previous day's brutal drill, none of them dared be late. Their bodies ached, their minds still replaying every moment. Graves' calm voice, her disappointment, her precision. They assembled in the training yard, standing shoulder to shoulder. Jenkins felt the stiffness in his back, but didn't complain. Carter kept glancing toward the command office where Graves usually emerged. When she appeared, everything fell silent. No need for whistles. No shouting. Just her presence, steady, quiet, commanding. Morning, recruits, Graves began, hands clasped behind her back. Yesterday, you failed a trust exercise. Her tone was even, but it hit hard. Today, you'll learn what it means to trust when it counts. The recruits exchanged wary looks. None of them knew what was coming. She pointed toward the distance, a cluster of low buildings near the firing range. Your task is simple. You'll escort a simulated supply convoy through 3 checkpoints. Expect ambushes. Expect traps. Expect to adapt. She paused, her gaze sweeping over them. You have 2 hours. No radios, no outside help. Move as a team or not at all. They nodded, gathered their gear, and set out. The field stretched wide under the rising sun. It was quiet, almost too quiet. Carter scanned the horizon through binoculars. No movement, he whispered. Jenkins crouched beside him. Which means they're waiting for us. Alvarez checked their flank. We'll split into pairs. Move staggered. Cover each other. The recruits moved with a growing sense of unity. Every step, every whisper, they'd learned to coordinate without shouting, without chaos. They reached the first checkpoint easily. Too easily. Then the explosions came. 3 thunderous blasts shook the ground, throwing dirt and debris into the air. Smoke blinded them. The recruits dove for cover. Carter's ears rang as he hit the ground, his heart hammering. Contact! Jenkins shouted. Left side. Simulated rounds cracked through the smoke. Training paintballs, but fired with enough force to sting like real shrapnel. Move! Move! Alvarez yelled, signaling toward a ditch. They sprinted, dragging one recruit who'd tripped. They reached the second checkpoint, panting, covered in dirt and paint. Graves' voice came through a loudspeaker, hidden somewhere nearby. Not bad, she said. But you hesitated. Out there, hesitation gets people killed. Jenkins clenched his jaw. "Copy that, ma'am." "Don't copy it," she replied sharply. "Fix it." The line went silent. They pushed toward the next zone. The air grew hotter. The smoke from the explosions still lingered. Every sound made them twitch. A bird's cry, a distant clang of metal. Then, suddenly, they heard it, screaming. A human voice. Real, not from speakers. Not part of the exercise. The recruits froze. "What the hell was that?" Carter whispered. Another scream, this time closer, desperate. Jenkins turned toward the tree line, eyes narrowing. "That's no simulation." Before they could move, Graves' voice came through again. "Recruits, continue your mission." Her tone was calm, controlled, but something about it sounded different. Almost forced. "Ma'am," Jenkins called, gripping his radio. "Permission to investigate the sound. Possible casualty in the area." "Negative," Graves responded instantly. "Your objective is the convoy route." The recruits exchanged uncertain glances. "But, ma'am, that's an order." She cut him off. They hesitated. The screaming didn't stop. Carter looked at Jenkins. "If it's real, we can't just walk away." Alvarez nodded. "She said leave no one behind." "That includes whoever's out there." Jenkins clenched his teeth. He knew what disobeying a direct order meant. Punishment, maybe expulsion. But his gut told him something was wrong. He turned to his team. "We moved toward the sound. Stay low." They crept through the trees, weapons ready. The smell of burning fuel hit them before they saw it. A small vehicle overturned near the training road, smoke rising from its hood. A young Marine lay on the ground beside it, blood streaking down his arm. Real blood. Carter rushed forward, checking for a pulse. "He's alive." "Get pressure on the wound." Alvarez barked, pulling off his jacket. Jenkins scanned the area. No sign of instructors, no cameras. This wasn't a drill anymore. Then they heard footsteps. Graves appeared from the smoke, helmet off, face streaked with sweat and soot. "Who authorized this move?" she demanded, voice sharp as a blade. Jenkins snapped to attention. "I did, ma'am." Her eyes locked on his. "You defied a direct order." "Yes, ma'am." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Why?" "Because someone was hurt," he said. "And you taught us to never leave anyone behind." For a long moment, Graves said nothing. The other recruits stood frozen, waiting for the explosion that would surely come next. Then she nodded. "Good," she said quietly. "Now help me get him out." They worked together in silence, stabilizing the injured Marine. Graves directed them with swift, practiced movements. Pressure here, tie that there, keep the airway clear. It was like watching a machine operate, precise and fearless. Carter whispered under his breath, "She's done this before?" Graves heard him but didn't respond. When the medics finally arrived, she stepped back, wiping her hands on her vest. "He'll live," she said, "because you trusted your instincts." That's the kind of decision that separates leaders from followers. Jenkins exhaled, the tension in his chest finally breaking. "Ma'am," Alvarez said slowly, "that wasn't part of the exercise." "Was it?" Graves looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Not today, no." And she turned away. "Pack it up. Debrief in 10. Back at the range, the recruits sat in silence, drenched in sweat and confusion. Graves stood before them, arms crossed. "You disobeyed an order," she said. "You broke formation. You risked your assignment." No one spoke. Then she continued, her voice softer. "And you made the right call." The recruits blinked in surprise. Graves took off her cap and tossed it onto the table. "In combat, orders can save lives or end them. You need the discipline to follow, but also the judgment to know when to think. That's what leadership means. Her eyes met Jenkins. You showed both today. That's rare. For the first time, there was something human in her tone. Not just authority, but respect. She paced slowly. What happened today was real. A transport vehicle now functioned near your course. If you hadn't acted, that Marine might have bled out. The rest of the base was still responding. The room went silent again, heavy with the realization. Carter finally spoke. Ma'am, how did you stay so calm? Graves paused. Then she said, because I've been there before. The recruits leaned forward, waiting. She looked down for a moment, then met their eyes again. Afghanistan, 2009. My team took a hit during an exfil. I was the only medic left standing. Had to treat 3 men under fire with 1 kit and a jammed rifle. Her voice didn't shake, but her eyes gave her away. The memory was still alive in her. That's where I learned silence isn't weakness, she continued. It's focus. When you stop talking and start acting, that's when you lead. She put her cap back on, her expression composed once again. Dismissed, she said quietly. The recruits stood, saluted, and filed out, but the silence that followed wasn't awkward this time. It was respect. The kind that can't be faked. As night fell over the base, Jenkins sat outside, staring at the training field. She's different, Carter said, sitting beside him. Jenkins nodded slowly. Yeah, because she's real. She's not training us for drills. She's training us for war. From her office window, Graves watched them through the glass, a faint smile crossing her face. They were learning faster than she'd expected. But she also knew the hardest lesson was still ahead. Tomorrow, they'd face something no training manual could prepare them for. And for the first time in a long time, Lieutenant Commander Elena Graves felt the stir of something she thought she'd lost years ago. Hope. The rain started before dawn. Not the soft kind, the kind that fell in thick, cold sheets, turning the training field into a sea of mud and misery. Thunder rumbled low across the sky, and lightning split the horizon every few seconds. The recruits were already outside, standing in formation, soaked to the bone. No one complained anymore. Not after what happened yesterday, the simulation that turned into a real rescue. Lieutenant Commander Graves stood in front of them, her uniform already drenched, but her posture as steady as ever. She looked carved from stone, rain streaming down her face, eyes unreadable. Today, she said, her voice cutting through the storm, you'll face your limits. Jenkins exchanged glances with Carter and Alvarez. The phrase sounded simple, but coming from Graves, it felt like a warning. She continued, every one of you has a breaking point. Today, you'll find it, and you'll decide what to do when you reach it. Her gaze swept across them. You think I'm talking about strength? I'm not. I'm talking about fear, the kind that eats you from the inside. No one moved. No one dared. She nodded to Chief Dalton, who stood off to the side, clipboard in hand. Let's begin. The recruits were divided into 3 groups and sent into different zones. Graves didn't explain what each one would face. That was part of the test. Jenkins' group was led to the obstacle course, now transformed into a flooded, chaotic mess. The rain hadn't stopped. The ground was a slick, sucking trap. Crawl through the trenches, scale the wall, cross the wire bridge, Dalton ordered. Simple enough, except you'll be blindfolded. What? Carter asked. Dalton grinned. You heard me. One mistake, one wrong step, you'll end up face first in the mud. The point's not speed. It's trust. Jenkins hesitated, but he saw Graves standing off to the side, watching them. Her arms were crossed, but her eyes were sharp, focused. He tied the blindfold around his head and took a deep breath. Let's move. The mud was freezing. He crawled forward, feeling with his hands, listening to Carter's breathing behind him. Every sound was amplified. The rain, the wind, the distant clang of metal. Left, Carter called softly. There's a dip. Jenkins followed the voice. They moved inch by inch, their confidence in each other tested with every step. When they reached the wall, they untied their blindfolds and looked up. The slick surface seemed higher than ever. Carter groaned. You've got to be kidding me. They tried once, failed, tried again, slipped. Finally, Jenkins planted his feet and cupped his hands. Go, he told Carter. Use me. Carter hesitated, then climbed, pushing off Jenkins' shoulders, grabbing the top. Your turn. He shouted, reaching down. Jenkins leapt, catching Carter's arm, using the last of his strength to pull himself up. They collapsed at the top, gasping. Below, Graves called out, That's what I wanted to see. You don't climb alone. You climb together. Meanwhile, in another zone, Alvarez's group faced a different challenge. They were taken into the barracks, dark, lights off, windows covered. The only illumination came from a single flickering bulb. Find your way to the exit, the instructor ordered. No communication allowed. If you speak, you start over. The recruits nodded. The door slammed shut behind them. The silence was suffocating. Alvarez moved slowly, hands outstretched, feeling along the walls. A metal pipe clanged somewhere, making her flinch. Her heart raced. The darkness triggered something deep in her, a memory she hadn't thought of in years. A memory of being trapped during a training collapse years before she joined the Navy. Her breathing quickened. Her hands trembled. Then she heard it, a whisper. It's okay. It was Morales, one of the quieter recruits. He didn't speak loud enough for the instructors to hear, just enough for her to know she wasn't alone. She reached forward, found his shoulder, and together they moved through the dark. When they reached the exit and the door opened, the light hit her face. She was shaking, but she was smiling. Graves stood by the door, watching. She didn't speak, but she gave a small nod. Alvarez understood. The test wasn't about finding the door. It was about finding herself. The final group faced something even harder. They were sent to the water training pit, a deep pool used for survival drills. The water was icy, churning from the rain. Underwater breath control, Dalton announced. You'll go in one by one. Stay under as long as you can. Don't panic. Surface too early, and you fail. A recruit named Diaz stepped forward first. He was one of the smallest, but he'd been eager to prove himself since day one. He jumped in. Seconds passed. Then a minute. Then 2. At 2.5, bubbles rose rapidly. He broke the surface, gasping, eyes wide with panic. Dalton shook his head. Panic wins again. Graves stepped closer, crouched beside the pool. Diaz, she said quietly, why did you come up? He coughed. I thought. I couldn't breathe anymore. Her voice was calm. Did you actually run out of air? He hesitated. No, ma'am. Then what stopped you? Diaz stared at the water. Fear. Graves nodded slowly. That's what you're fighting, not the water. Fear is the enemy. Once you name it, it loses power. She stood. Get back in. He blinked. Ma'am? You heard me. He looked terrified, but he did it. This time, he lasted 3 minutes. When he surfaced, he wasn't gasping. He was smiling. Graves gave him a rare grin. There it is. Control. Hours passed. The rain never stopped. By afternoon, every recruit had faced something that pushed them past their limit. Cold, exhaustion, fear, pain. When they regrouped at the yard, they looked different. Not cleaner, not sharper, but stronger. Graves stood in front of them, her uniform streaked with mud, her expression unreadable. "You hate me right now," she said simply. "Good." No one denied it. "That means you're alive. That means you've seen what weakness looks like, and what happens when you refuse to give in to it." Her gaze swept over them, stopping on each one. "You think I'm training you to fight. I'm not. I'm training you to endure. Because war doesn't always come with bullets. Sometimes it's just life, and life hits harder." She stepped closer, the rain dripping off her cap. "But if you can survive this, if you can hold your ground when everything in you screams to quit, you'll earn more than a patch on your shoulder. You'll earn respect, the kind that can't be taken away." The recruits stood silent, breathing heavily, rain mixing with sweat and mud. Then Jenkins, tired, sore, and soaking wet, straightened his back and said, "We're not done, Mom." Graves' lips twitched into a faint smile. "No, you're not." That night, as lightning flashed across the base, Graves sat alone in the mess hall, the same place where it had all begun. The echo of laughter from that first day still lingered in her memory. She sipped her coffee, looking out at the dark field. She thought of the recruits, each of them broken in different ways, but still standing, still trying. Dalton walked in, dropping a wet clipboard on the table. "You're pushing them hard," he said. "They can take it," Graves replied. He raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" Some of them were shaking out there. "So was I," she said quietly. Dalton frowned. "What?" She looked up. "The first time I was tested like that, I broke. But someone rebuilt me. Now it's my turn." Dalton studied her for a moment, then nodded. "They'll be ready soon." Graves looked out the window again. "They'd better be," she murmured, "because what's coming next will decide everything." The storm outside finally began to ease, but inside, the recruits lay awake in their bunks, every muscle sore, every mind alive with thoughts of the day. Carter whispered from across the room, "You think she ever breaks?" Jenkins turned his head toward the dark ceiling. "If she does," he said, "she never lets it show." And as thunder rolled one last time across the sky, none of them realized that tomorrow they would see Lieutenant Commander Graves face her own breaking point, and everything they had learned would be put to the ultimate test. The chopper blades thundered overhead as the recruits crouched low, the wind slicing through the darkness like 1,000 invisible knives. Rain poured down in sheets, soaking every uniform, every weapon, every nerve. The air smelled of fuel, mud, and adrenaline. Lieutenant Commander Elena Graves stood at the open bay door, her silhouette outlined by the flashing red lights of the helicopter cabin. Her eyes were locked on the terrain below, a dense black swamp stretching endlessly into the night. "This isn't a drill," she shouted over the roar. "Tonight, you prove you can survive as a team, or you don't come back until you learn how." Her tone was ice, her authority absolute. None of the 12 recruits dared to speak. They were exhausted, physically, mentally, emotionally. Weeks of relentless training under Graves had stripped away their arrogance, replacing it with something rawer, sharper, fear, respect. "Your mission," Graves continued, "is simple. Navigate 2 miles through enemy terrain, retrieve the beacon, and extract before dawn. No communication, no shortcuts, and no quitting. If one of you fails, you all fail." The recruits nodded, determination burning beneath their exhaustion. Jenkins, who once mocked her in the mess hall, now held her gaze and nodded firmly. "Yes, ma'am." Graves gave him a brief look, unreadable, but approving. "Good," she said, "because tonight you'll learn the difference between training and war." Then she jumped. Without hesitation, the recruits followed her into the storm. The swamp water hit like ice, sucking at their legs as they splashed down. The night swallowed them whole. The only sounds were their own breathing and the distant hum of the helicopter fading into the rain. Carter stumbled first. The mud swallowed his boot, and Jenkins grabbed his arm, yanking him free. "Stay tight," Jenkins hissed, eyes on Graves. But Graves was already 20 feet ahead, moving like a ghost through the darkness. She didn't seem to fight the terrain. She flowed through it, each step deliberate, balanced, efficient. They followed her lead, moving in low crouches, checking perimeters, their earlier bravado long gone. This wasn't about being the fastest or the loudest anymore. It was about surviving. After an hour of silent movement, Graves raised a hand. The team froze instantly. "Listen," she whispered. In the distance, faint, rhythmic splashes. Not theirs. Enemy patrol. The recruits tensed. They'd been told this was a simulation, but everything about it felt too real. The rain, the darkness, the unpredictability. Graves motioned for them to spread out and find cover. She crouched beside Jenkins, whispering low. "Remember what I taught you. Noise gives away your life." He nodded. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. The patrol came closer. 2 figures, their flashlights cutting through the rain. Jenkins' fingers twitched near his rifle trigger. Graves shook her head. Patience. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then, as the patrol passed, Graves moved silently behind them. 2 quick steps. A smooth motion, and both enemies were down before Jenkins even exhaled. She turned back. Move. They did. Not one recruit dared to make a sound. 2 miles felt like 20. They crawled through mud, waded through water up to their chests, and climbed slick, uneven terrain. Every moment tested their will. Carter was the first to falter. His breathing grew ragged. His legs trembled. He stumbled to his knees. "Get up," Graves ordered, standing over him. I can't," he gasped. "My leg." Graves crouched beside him, grabbed his collar, and leaned in close. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "You think the enemy cares about your leg, recruit?" Carter's eyes burned with tears. "No, ma'am." "Then move." He tried again, teeth clenched. Jenkins stepped in, grabbing his arm and slinging it over his shoulder. "Come on, man. We're not leaving you." Graves' eyes flicked toward him. "Good," she said quietly. "That's the first real thing you've done all night." By 0300 hours, they reached the beacon site, a small, flickering light half buried under a fallen tree. It wasn't the objective that mattered. It was what it represented, unity under pressure. Alvarez retrieved it and nodded to Graves. "Mission complete, Mom." But Graves didn't smile. Her gaze shifted toward the tree line. Not yet. The recruits turned too late. 3 flashbangs erupted, filling the night with light and sound. Chaos exploded around them. "Ambush!" Jenkins shouted. The recruits dove for cover. The enemy, older SEAL trainees brought in. For the exercise, advanced through the smoke, shouting commands and firing blanks. Carter panicked. "We're pinned." Graves, calm as ever, moved through the chaos like a phantom. "Flank left. Use the rain. It hides your movement." They obeyed. This time, they didn't argue, didn't question. Jenkins led Alvarez, and Carter on a flank, while Graves and 2 others laid down suppressive fire. Mud splattered. Water churned. The recruits fought back with precision they didn't know they had. When the last smoke cleared, silence fell again. Only the rain remained. The recruits stood there, panting, soaked, trembling, but alive. Graves lowered her rifle and looked at them, one by one. "You just survived a live SEAL engagement drill," she said. "Not bad for rookies." The realization hit them all at once. This hadn't been just another test. It had been her world, given to them for a night. They hiked back to base as dawn broke, the first pink rays cutting through the fog. Their bodies ached, but there was something new in their eyes, a quiet understanding. At the base gate, Graves stopped and faced them. "You learned something tonight," she said. "What was it?" Jenkins, mud-covered and exhausted, spoke first. "That teamwork isn't about words, ma'am. It's about trust." Carter nodded. "And that silence doesn't mean weakness. It means control." Graves smiled faintly, the first real smile they'd ever seen from her. "Good. You're starting to understand?" She looked at each of them, her gaze steady. "War doesn't care about your pride. It cares about your decisions. Remember that, and you might just make it through the real thing." Then, turning toward the sunrise, she added quietly, "Dismissed." The recruits saluted her, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. As they walked away, Jenkins glanced back. Graves was still standing there, framed by the dawn, her figure strong and calm against the rising light. For the first time, he realized something. The woman they had once mocked wasn't just a Navy SEAL. She was the Navy SEAL, the standard they all now dreamed to reach. That morning, in the mess hall where it had all begun, their laughter was gone. Instead, there was silence, not awkward or fearful, but respectful. They ate in peace, quietly, each of them thinking about the night before. When Graves walked in, every single recruit stood. She didn't acknowledge it, didn't need to. She just picked up her coffee, gave a single nod, and walked past them. But for the first time, the recruits smiled, because they finally understood what that nod meant. They'd earned it. The sun hung low over the Virginia base that morning, its golden light spilling across the training grounds, where 12 recruits stood shoulder to shoulder. Their uniforms were clean, their boots polished, their eyes sharp. Weeks of brutal conditioning, endless drills, and impossible tests had led to this day, graduation. But there was no joy in their faces yet, just quiet anticipation. Because everyone knew, before the ceremony, there was one final evaluation, and Lieutenant Commander Elena Graves would be the one to give it. They stood in formation as the sound of her boots echoed across the tarmac. The recruits straightened instantly, spines locked, eyes forward. Graves appeared from the far side of the field, wearing full SEAL combat gear for the first time in their presence. The trident glinted on her chest, the unmistakable emblem of the United States Navy SEALs. Jenkins swallowed hard. Even after everything they'd been through, seeing that insignia hit him differently. This wasn't just a symbol. It was proof of everything she'd survived, everything she'd sacrificed. She stopped in front of them, hands behind her back. "At ease," she said. Her voice carried the same quiet authority it always did, but this time there was something else, something almost proud. "You 12 have been through more than most recruits ever face." Graves began. "You've been broken, tested, and rebuilt. You've faced the limits of your endurance and discovered what lives on the other side of pain." Her eyes swept the line, resting briefly on each of them. Carter, Alvarez, Jenkins, and the rest. "You've learned that strength isn't about how loud you are. It's about how steady you remain when everything falls apart." Carter's throat tightened. He remembered the swamp, the rain, the terror, and her voice cutting through it all like a lifeline. Graves continued, "You're no longer individuals fighting for your own pride. You're a team. And in this line of work, that's the only thing that keeps you alive." She paused. The silence between her words felt sacred. "Today," she said, "you earn your place among those who serve." The recruits didn't move. None dared to breathe too loudly. Then Graves did something unexpected. She removed her cap and set it on the ground. "Before we finish," she said quietly, "you deserve to know something." The air shifted. "I wasn't supposed to be here," she said. her tone softer now. "When I first joined the Navy, I was told there were limits, that I wasn't built for the SEALs, that my place was behind a desk, not on the front lines." Her eyes drifted toward the horizon, her voice steady but heavy with memory. "But I didn't join to prove them wrong. I joined because when someone falls, someone has to go back for them. And I couldn't live knowing I didn't try." The recruits stood frozen. They'd heard whispers of her past, but never from her directly. "I've buried teammates," she said quietly. "I've made calls that haunted me. I've watched good men break under pressure. And every time I came home, people looked at me and asked how a woman could live through all that." She looked at them then, really looked. "The truth is, I didn't live through it because I'm stronger than them. I lived because I never fought alone. That's what being a SEAL means." The words hit harder than any lecture. Jenkins felt a lump rise in his throat. Alvarez blinked rapidly, trying to hide the moisture in his eyes. Graves took a slow breath. "You've mocked me, doubted me, and questioned why I'm here. But you've also grown. You've learned what respect truly means and what it costs." She stepped closer, her gaze sharp again, but filled with pride. "From this moment forward, you carry the name of this unit. You carry the weight of every SEAL who came before you. And you carry my trust." For a moment, silence blanketed the field. Thick, powerful, unbreakable. Then she nodded. "Form up for the final run." The recruits took off across the field, boots pounding against the dirt, lungs burning, hearts racing. It wasn't about speed anymore. It was about unity. 12 sets of footsteps, one rhythm, one heartbeat. Graves ran with them. Not ahead, not behind, with them. When they reached the finish line, drenched in sweat and sunlight, the base commander stood waiting. His face was unreadable, but his tone was solemn. "By the authority vested in me by the United States Navy," he began, "I hereby certify these 12 recruits as graduates of the Advanced Training Program." He paused, then turned to Graves. "Commander Graves, your evaluation?" Graves looked at her recruits. "Approved," she said simply. The commander nodded. "Then it's official." The recruits stood at attention, and the commander saluted them. "Welcome to the United States Navy." A cheer went up, restrained, but filled with relief and pride. They had made it. Graves, however, remained quiet. She approached Jenkins, who now stood straight and serious, his uniform immaculate. "Sir?" he began, but she cut him off gently. "You don't need to apologize," she said. He swallowed. "I was an idiot, ma'am." She smirked slightly. "Yes, you were. But now you're a SEAL student. Don't waste that." He nodded, eyes wet. "Yes, ma'am." Carter stepped forward next, offering a salute that trembled only slightly. "Thank you, Commander, for not giving up on us." Graves returned the salute. "Don't thank me. Earn it every day." That evening, the mess hall was different. The same long tables, the same trays, the same hum of conversation, but the energy had changed. The laughter was genuine now, grounded, respectful. They weren't just recruits anymore. They were brothers. When Graves entered, the room went silent, not out of fear, but reverence. Every recruit stood and saluted. She gave a small nod and made her way to the corner table, the same one she'd sat at weeks ago when they first mocked her. But this time, she wasn't alone. Jenkins and the others joined her, uninvited but welcome. They sat quietly, eating beside her, sharing small smiles. No words were needed. The bond between them said it all. After a while, Jenkins spoke softly. "Commander, when we first saw you here, we thought you were just another officer." Graves raised an eyebrow. "Just another officer?" He smiled. "Yeah, turns out You were the reason we became who we are." Graves looked at him for a moment, then simply nodded. "That's the goal, Jenkins. To leave a mark that doesn't fade." She sipped her coffee, black, strong, just the way she liked it. "Now eat. Tomorrow starts a new chapter. And trust me." She smirked. "The world out there is far less forgiving than I am." The recruits chuckled softly. But behind their laughter was something lasting. Admiration. Because they all knew one thing now. Legends weren't born from noise or arrogance. They were built from silence, discipline, and unshakable will. And Lieutenant Commander Elena Graves, the woman they once mocked, was living proof of it. Years later, when those 12 men became leaders themselves, they would still speak of her. Of the woman who sat alone in the mess hall. Of the storm that changed them. Of the lesson they never forgot. And every time they met a new recruit who thought toughness came from shouting the loudest, they'd simply smile and say, "Sit down, kid. Let me tell you about the quietest person who ever walked into a mess hall."